Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're diving into a truly wild period in recent American history, June 2026. This was a month defined by what you might call, well, regulatory whiplash. I mean, in just a matter of weeks, we saw the boundaries of U.S. federal power shrink dramatically in one area, only to turn around and aggressively expand in another. We've got three totally distinct situations to unpack today, and together they're going to show us exactly how the rules governing both regular citizens and massive corporations are literally being rewritten in real time.
So here's our roadmap. First up, we're looking at the Himani gun case and how the Supreme Court used the historical analog test. From there, we'll pivot to the tech sector, specifically the Anthropic export ban and the new frontier of regulating AI usage. And finally, we'll look at the White House agenda to get the broader domestic picture before we bring the whole shebang together to map out the shifting federal landscape.
Right. So, part one, the Himani gun case and a limit on federal overreach.
Let's jump right into this landmark Supreme Court ruling, United States versus Himani. This is a massive moment where the judicial branch actually stepped in and placed a hard limit on federal regulatory reach over an individual. But to really grasp it, we got to look at the facts. So, Ali Himani, he's a Texas-born dual U.S. and Pakistan citizen with a totally normal, stable job near Dallas. Now, back in 2022, the government suspected his family of terrorism-related activities. They searched their home, Himani was fully cooperative, and spoiler alert, the search turned up absolutely zero evidence of terrorism. But during that search, he voluntarily handed over a gun he kept in the house. And he also casually mentioned to investigators that he used marijuana about every other day. Now, what's absolutely wild here is how a massive national security investigation suddenly pivoted into a prosecution based entirely on marijuana use. He was indicted for knowingly possessing a gun while being an unlawful user of a controlled substance.
And here's the kicker. Under 18 U.S.C. Section 922G3, simply being a regular user of a controlled substance while owning a firearm carries an insanely steep penalty. Literally just based on his admission of smoking weed every other day, Himani was automatically staring down up to 15 years in federal prison. 15 years, plus a permanent lifetime ban on ever owning a firearm again. And this penalty kicks in instantly, without any prior due process or a hearing to figure out if he's actually a danger to anyone.
Which brings us to part two, the historical analog test, or finding precedent in the past.
So Himani's defense argued that this modern law violated his Second Amendment rights. And to figure out if that was true, the Supreme Court used this thing called the historical analog test, basically looking back in time for precedent. Now, the government tried to claim that banning modern drug users is totally the same as colonial-era laws that targeted habitual drunkards. But, as Justice Gorsuch pointed out, that analogy completely falls apart. You see, the modern federal law automatically disarms anyone who regularly uses any amount of an illegal substance, right? It doesn't even matter if it affects their judgment. But those historical habitual drunkard laws, they were different. They didn't target people just for drinking often. They specifically required a person to be completely incapacitated, like someone who had literally lost their ordinary reasoning faculties or couldn't manage their own affairs.
The Supreme Court's opinion actually gives us some really fascinating historical context here. Early America had what they called a culture of copious drinking. The court even noted that James Madison allegedly drank a pint of whiskey every single day. And John Adams, hard cider for breakfast. So, given those historical realities, frequency of use alone was never the legal standard for losing your constitutional rights. You had to be a confirmed drunkard who was a legit threat to yourself or your family's finances. On top of that, historical laws almost always required a pre-deprivation process, like standing before a judge, before stripping away your rights. The modern statute just bypasses all that entirely. So ultimately, the Supreme Court ruled the federal government overreached, and they struck down the application of the law against Himani.
Okay, so here's the crucial takeaway. We are watching the judicial branch actively rein in the federal government's power to regulate citizens based on these broad, sweeping categories. But if the judicial branch is pulling back federal power in one area, where is the executive branch aggressively expanding it? Well, to answer that, we have to pivot over to the tech industry.
Moving on to part 3, the Anthropic export ban and the tech pivot.
Right around that exact same time, in June 2026, the Commerce Department launched an unprecedented crackdown on artificial intelligence exports, zeroing in on the AI startup Anthropic. And the speed of this regulatory escalation, it'll give you whiplash. Just 2 weeks prior, the president put out an executive order outlining a strategy for companies to voluntarily vet their AI models. Fast forward to June, and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick suddenly drops a mandatory order Out of nowhere, Anthropic is forced to get U.S. government approval before any foreign nationals could use their advanced Feeble 5 and Mythos 5 AI models. Anthropic had to comply immediately, literally disabling foreign access to these cloud-based systems overnight.
Okay, part 4. Regulating AI usage, which is really a whole new regulatory frontier. See, this wasn't just a headache for one single company. It fundamentally rewrote the rules for all software developers. Historically, the tech industry assumed the government could only restrict the transfer of actual software code, like, putting sensitive software on a physical hard drive and shipping it overseas. But here, the government shifted its focus from restricting code to restricting the actual usage of a cloud-based program. The legal tool they used for this is called a deemed export. Now, previously, this was a super obscure regulatory framework, but the Bureau of Industry and Security applied it to AI. What does that mean for us? It means that someone sitting in another country simply typing a prompt into a cloud-based AI model legally constitutes a technology transfer. The U.S. government essentially decided, hey, we have the authority to police interactions happening in the cloud, citing broad national security grounds.
Now, what's absolutely crucial to understand is the real-world fallout here. Former Commerce Department official Kate Carnan put it perfectly, noting that since the Commerce Department has done this once, no company can rule out them doing it again for any model at any time. This creates massive unpredictability for the global software industry. Developers suddenly can't promise stable access for their international clients. It builds this environment of profound uncertainty, right, where a business's day-to-day operations can just be instantly shut down by an executive decree.
Let's look at part 5, the White House agenda and the domestic picture. So, while the courts are debating colonial drinking habits and the Commerce Department is shutting down global AI access, what's the White House doing? Well, they were highly focused on structured domestic messaging. Looking at the official briefings from that same week, you see things like First Lady Melania Trump launching Fostering the Future accounts to help foster youth financially. The president is putting out statements for the 250th anniversary of the Magna Carta. There's Men's Health Week proclamations and a commemoration for the 251st birthday of the U.S. Army. It's such a fascinating contrast. Behind the scenes, federal power is locked in tense court battles and aggressively expanding its grip on global tech. But the public-facing messaging? That stays steadfastly focused on civic unity, historical anniversaries, and domestic welfare.
Which brings us to our final section, the shifting federal landscape and redefining the rules.
When we take a step back and look at June 2026 in its entirety, a really clear narrative starts to form. The events of this month are a perfect example of a constant, real-time renegotiation of what we as citizens and what tech companies are actually allowed to do. Over in the Hemeny case, the Supreme Court demands rigorous historical proof before letting the government strip away an individual's rights. But flip over to the Anthropic case, and you have the executive branch unilaterally redefining decades-old export laws to instantly block access to cutting-edge technology, totally bypassing normal legislative debate. Which leaves us with one incredibly critical question to ponder. As the boundaries of federal power simultaneously expand and contract in entirely different directions, how do we effectively balance national security, public safety, and individual freedoms in a rapidly changing world? When a centuries-old constitution collides with cloud-based AI and modern drug policy, where should the lines of federal power ultimately be drawn? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, stay curious, and definitely consider how these shifting boundaries might just affect your own daily life.